My name is Jenna, and I was married to Paul for 27 years. I thought I knew what grief would feel like, but I was wrong. It wasn't the silence after the loss or the empty side of the bed. It was the moment I realized I had never really known the man I buried. The morning of Paul's funeral was quiet, in a way that felt staged, like the world had paused out of politeness. The sky hung low grey and pressing, and I remember thinking how oddly fitting it was, like even the weather understood the weight of that day. I arrived early, too early, not wanting to face the pity in people's eyes, not knowing yet that pity wouldn't be what they were offering. I had chosen my outfit carefully: black dress, simple heels, minimal makeup. I looked like a widow, and in every sense, I believed I was. For almost 3 decades, I had shared a life with Paul. No children, just the two of us. We had holidays alone, quiet evenings, and routines that wrapped around us like warm blankets. He travelled often 6 months of the year for business. I never questioned it. I trusted him maybe more than I trusted myself. When I walked into the chapel, something shifted. Faces turned, but not with sympathy. There was confusion, tension, a current of unease that I couldn't explain. Some people I recognized from photos he had shown me. Others were complete strangers, yet they looked at me as if I were the intruder. Then I saw her. She stood near the casket dressed in black like me, but with an air of possession I couldn't place. Her hands were clenched tightly in front of her, and beside her stood a young man and woman in their 30s. The man glared at me like I had walked into his home uninvited. The woman wouldn't even look at me. I sat near the front because I thought I belonged there. After all, I was Paul's wife. I had signed the mortgage, packed his suitcases, and picked him up from the airport 100 times. But as the service began, I could feel eyes burning into the back of my neck. It wasn't mourning. It was something colder. After the final prayer, I stood to leave, heart heavy and feet numb. That's when I heard it. A man's voice, loud, angry, sharp enough to stop the procession in its tracks. Unbelievable. She has the nerve to show up here. I turned frozen and saw the young man pointing directly at me. His mother reached for his arm, but he kept going. "You ruined our family. You are nothing but a mistress." Murmurs rippled through the crowd like wildfire. I couldn't move. I couldn't even breathe. The words hung in the air like smoke, choking me with their meaning. People began whispering. Some stared. Others looked away. I turned to the woman in black, the one who had stood by the casket with such fierce sorrow. She didn't look confused. She looked devastated, betrayed. And worst of all, she looked like she had known about me all along. But I had never seen her before, not once. My legs moved without instruction, carrying me out the side door and into the parking lot where I collapsed into the front seat of my car. I didn't cry. I couldn't. My body refused to catch up with my mind. I stared straight ahead as the pieces began to fall. 27 years gone. Not just to death, but to lies I hadn't even known were being told. Paul had another wife, another family, a whole life that ran parallel to ours. While I planned anniversaries and waited by the phone during his trips, he was blowing out birthday candles in another home. While I made his favourite meals, he was holding someone else at night. But in that moment, sitting behind the wheel, clutching the steering like it might keep me from breaking apart, I didn't feel angry. I felt erased. And worse, I could feel that the world wasn't going to wait for me to explain myself. They had already made up their minds. I was the other woman. I just hadn't known it yet. The days after the funeral felt like a blur I couldn't escape. I didn't leave the house, not because I was grieving, but because I was afraid of being seen. My phone lit up constantly with notifications, but I couldn't bring myself to look. When I finally opened a few messages, I wished I hadn't. They weren't condolences. They were accusations, harsh words from strangers, and people I once called friends, calling me a liar, a thief, a woman who preyed on a dying man for his money. Someone had posted a photo of me leaving the funeral, my face partially hidden but clear enough. The caption read, "She had the nerve to show up." Another comment said I was probably counting her inheritance before the casket was even closed. My inbox was filled with emails I couldn't bear to read past the subject lines. I checked my social media out of habit, but that was a mistake. I wasn't tagged, but I didn't need to be. My name floated through threads and local pages, people dissecting my life with gleeful cruelty. Some said I had known all along that I had played the long game and finally won. One woman I hadn't seen in years messaged me just to say she was disgusted. A former co-worker blocked me without a word. Even the neighbour who once brought me soup when I was sick walked past my house without looking up. It felt like the entire town had signed an unspoken agreement to erase me. I stayed in my living room for hours, lights off, sitting on the floor. I clutched the last photograph of me and Paul, not because I believed in it anymore, but because I didn't know what else to hold on to. The silence that had once been peaceful now felt like judgment pressing in from every wall. At night, I couldn't sleep. I would lie awake listening to the wind outside, wondering if it carried more gossip, more hate. Every car that drove by made me flinch. Every time the doorbell rang, I felt my stomach drop. I stopped answering completely. I started to believe I deserved it. Maybe I should have asked more questions, seen more signs. But the truth was, I hadn't. I had trusted blindly, and now I was paying for that trust in isolation. The betrayal wasn't just Paul's. It was everyone's. Everyone who decided I wasn't worth hearing out. Everyone who assumed my silence meant guilt. In a single week, I lost my husband, my identity, and whatever peace I thought I had built. And I had no idea how to begin putting anything back together. There was a part of me that still clung to hope. Maybe it was all a misunderstanding. Maybe the woman at the funeral had mistaken me for someone else, and maybe the son had spoken out of grief, not truth. I knew it sounded desperate, but when your life falls apart overnight, your brain scrambles for any version that hurts less. So I did what I hadn't had the strength to do before. I opened Paul's file drawer, the one he always kept locked, but left the key in plain sight, like he was never hiding anything. At first it felt routine. Tax documents, retirement statements, nothing out of the ordinary. Then I found the flight itineraries, the same airline twice a year like clockwork. Departures in June, returns just before Christmas. Exactly when he claimed to be working out of state. My hands shook as I unfolded each itinerary. The names matched, the dates matched. But the destinations didn't. He wasn't going to New Jersey for business. He was flying into a small town in Ohio, a place I had never been, never heard him mention. I dug deeper, opening the online banking he never wanted me to use. There were wire transfers every month to an account with a woman's name I didn't recognize. The name matched the woman from the funeral. Linda. My stomach turned. There was a second health insurance plan listed under his employer records. The dependents section listed two names, a daughter, a son. Both names were familiar now. I had heard them shout in anger just days ago. I printed everything, not because I needed proof, but because I needed to see it all laid out cold and undeniable. The paper didn't lie. The numbers didn't lie. Paul had built a second life with surgical precision, and I had been living in the shadow of it without ever knowing. The more I found, the more I realized I had nothing left to believe in. 20 years of lies folded neatly into spreadsheets, bank records, and reservation confirmations. The man I loved didn't just betray me. He constructed an entirely separate world and left me completely out of it. And that truth, clear in black and white, hurt more than any rumor ever could. Walking into that office felt like stepping into a courtroom where I had already been tried and found guilty. I hesitated in the hallway, my hand on the doorknob, for longer than it should have been. But I walked in anyway, because part of me still needed answers, even if no one wanted me there. The room smelled of paper and old wood, cold and quiet in a way that didn't invite comfort. Linda was already seated, arms crossed, shoulders tight. Her children flanked her stiff and unreadable eyes fixed forward, as if they didn't see me enter even though I knew they had. No one looked at me, not directly, but I felt the shift in the air like a drop in pressure before a storm. A few glances flicked my way sharp and brief, like warnings. The lawyer gave me a nod, polite but distant, and gestured toward an empty chair in the back. I took it, clutching my purse like a shield. My coat still smelled faintly of Paul's cologne, and it made my stomach twist. I didn't belong here, not in their eyes. I wasn't family. I was the reason their version of him no longer made sense. The silence before the lawyer spoke dragged like a held breath. When he finally cleared his throat, the room seemed to brace itself. He began listing properties, accounts, and assets. Each item was read with clinical precision, but every word felt heavy, like it was dragging more judgment down on my shoulders. Linda didn't move. Her face was carved from stone. Her son's fingers tapped against his knee in a steady, angry rhythm. Her daughter sat still, but the tightness in her jaw told its own story. No one said a word, but their silence screamed. It screamed that I was the one who shouldn't be sitting there, that I had taken something sacred and twisted it, that they believed I had waited quietly and patiently for the man they loved to die so I could claim what wasn't mine. I kept my eyes on the floor, my heart pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. Every breath felt like it might shatter me. I wasn't there to fight. I wasn't there to defend myself. I just needed to know what Paul had chosen to leave behind, and what, if anything, he had left for me. I didn't expect kindness, but I also didn't expect to feel so completely alone, surrounded by people who once would have smiled at me in another life. Now all they saw was a woman wrapped in suspicion, sitting in the corner waiting for a verdict that had already been written. The lawyer's voice barely registered at first. He listed a house in Ohio, then a college fund for Linda's granddaughter, and a small trust for each of the children. Each item passed like a wave I knew wasn't meant for me, and I prepared myself for silence when my name never came. But then it did. For the remaining assets, the lawyer said the sole beneficiary is Jenna Callahan. The words didn't land right away. I thought I had misheard. I looked up slowly, and the room had gone completely still. He continued listing the marital home in Boston Paul's retirement accounts, investments, savings, everything. Each item was like a knock on the door of my disbelief. The silence broke with a chair screeching back. Linda's son stood red-faced, fists clenched. He pointed at me like I was some criminal. She knew. She had to know. His voice cracked through the air. You don't leave someone everything unless they were in on it. The daughter's voice joined his, sharp and cold. He was our father. You were just a distraction? I opened my mouth, but nothing came. My throat was too tight, my mind spinning. I couldn't form a single word to defend myself. The lawyer tried to speak, but the room was already lost to the shouting. Linda didn't yell. She didn't cry. She just stared at me, her face pale and empty. In that moment, I felt like I was looking into a mirror. A woman trying to hold on to the last shred of dignity while everything she believed was being torn away. I stood slowly, my knees, weak heart pounding. I didn't ask for this. I whispered more to myself than anyone else. But no one heard me. Or maybe they did, and didn't care. I didn't feel victorious. I felt exposed, like I was standing in the middle of a burning house, holding a match I never lit. The money meant nothing in that moment. What mattered was the look in their eyes. The betrayal they saw in me, even though I'd been betrayed just the same. I walked out of that office with my name in a will and nothing else. Not their respect, not their understanding. Just a storm of rage at my back, and a future I had no idea how to live with. After the will was read, I didn't go out for days. The world outside my window had turned sharp, full of stares and whispers I couldn't silence. Even inside my house, I didn't feel safe. My email is filled with messages from strangers, some calling me a gold digger, others demanding I return what wasn't mine. People who had never met me posted photos of my house online captioned with words like blood money and home wrecker. The local paper ran a piece about the secret second wife who inherited a fortune, and though it never mentioned my name, everyone knew who it meant. I tried not to read the comments, but some made it through anyway. I was accused of poisoning Paul with stress, of manipulating a dying man, of planned to sleep beside him while planning to take everything he had. None of it was true, but truth didn't seem to matter anymore. I couldn't sleep. Nights dragged on with the weight of unspoken accusations. Every time a car slowed down near my driveway, I wondered if someone had come to confront me. I began jumping at shadows, locking the doors twice, and keeping the curtains drawn, even during the day. People I had once shared holidays with now crossed the street to avoid me. One neighbor left a Bible in my mailbox, open to a verse about greed and judgment. I left it there for days before finally throwing it in the trash. It didn't feel like comfort. It felt like condemnation. The money didn't soothe any of it. It sat in folders and spreadsheets, cold and sterile. I didn't feel rich. I felt dirty, like everything that had once made my life simple and ordinary had been replaced by a curse. I stood in my kitchen one night, staring at the folder with my name on every page: mortgage, investment, beneficiary, all mine. But instead of pride or gratitude, I felt sick, like I had swallowed something rotten and couldn't get it out. I hadn't asked for this life. I hadn't wanted his money, not like this. If I could have traded it all just to go back to the moment before the funeral, I would have. Back to the version of my life where I still believed in my husband, where I could sit on the porch and not feel like a villain. But that life was gone. And what I had now was a house filled with ghosts and a bank account that felt more like a burden than a blessing. I almost didn't go. The idea of sitting across from Linda, the woman who had buried the same man as me, felt impossible. But the silence between us had grown heavy, and I couldn't carry it any longer. We met at a small cafe halfway between our towns. I arrived early, but she was already there, seated at a corner table, with her hands folded tight, as if holding herself together. I paused before sitting, unsure if I was walking into a confrontation or a confession. She didn't greet me, just looked up with tired eyes. I sat across from her heart, thudding so loudly I was sure she could hear it. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then she asked me if I loved him. Her voice was flat, but her eyes searched mine. I answered yes, because it was the only truth I had left. She nodded just once, like she needed to hear it, but didn't want to. She told me Paul had said I was just a girlfriend from the past. One of many, nothing serious. She believed him. I listened in silence, realizing how many versions of himself he had created, how little either of us truly knew. I told her I thought we'd grow old together, that I pictured us watching the seasons change from our porch. She let out a sound halfway between a laugh and a sigh and said holidays were the worst. Her kids always wondered why he missed their birthdays. We were both kept, she said. And that word landed with more weight than anything else. Not loved, not chosen, kept. We didn't cry. There was too much numbness between us. But we softened. Our voices lost their edge. Our posture eased. We talked about the lies the time stole and the pieces of ourselves we'd lost along the way. When we finally stood to leave, there was no handshake, no promises. Just a quiet understanding that we were not enemies. We were the wreckage of the same storm, sitting on opposite sides of the same shattered truth. And somehow, knowing that made the weight just a little easier to carry. The court papers arrived on a Tuesday, slid under my door in a thick envelope I didn't want to open. Inside were accusations dressed up in legal language: manipulation, coercion, exploiting a vulnerable man. All words that felt like poison on the page. Linda's children weren't letting it go. They believed I had schemed my way into Paul's will, twisted his grief or confusion into a final betrayal. The community fed off their anger. Rumors spread faster than truth ever could. People I didn't know left notes on my doorstep. Cowards hid behind anonymous accounts online calling me a parasite, a fraud, the woman who stole everything. Every time I left the house, I felt watched. Whispers followed me through grocery aisles. Some faces wore pity. Most held disgust. I didn't fight back. Not publicly. I hired a lawyer, handed him the documents, and let him handle the mess. He told me we had nothing to worry about. Paul had been of sound mind. Every change he made was documented, witnessed, and notarized. but it didn't stop the ache in my chest, the way my hands shook when I poured coffee, the way I avoided mirrors as if seeing myself might reveal some truth even I had missed. I hadn't done anything wrong, but I had become the symbol of something people hated. Still, I didn't speak out. Not in interviews, not on social media. I refused to explain myself to people who had already decided who I was. I chose silence. Not out of shame, but out of strength. I knew what dignity looked like. It wasn't loud. It didn't scream or claw. It waited. It endured. It stood tall even when the world tried to drag it through the dirt. So I walked past the headlines. I ignored the lies. I kept breathing. Because sometimes the only way to win is to outlast the storm, and I had already survived worse than their words. I didn't know she would come. The hearing was scheduled to determine if the case should move forward. I sat in the hallway outside the courtroom, trying to quiet the hum of anxiety in my chest, when I saw her walking toward me. Linda wore a simple navy dress, her face pale but steady. She sat beside me without speaking, her presence alone enough to draw curious glances. When the court clerk called us in, we rose together, two women who once stood on opposite sides of grief. Inside the courtroom, the judge reviewed documents while lawyers exchanged facts like currency. I kept my eyes down, hands folded tightly in my lap. Then Linda stood. Her voice was calm but firm, every word slicing through the air like it belonged. She said Paul was deceptive, yes, but not Jenna. That Jenna hadn't coerced him, that she hadn't stolen anything, that Paul had made his choices in private, leaving behind pain none of us deserved. She said we were both victims of a man who divided his love, his time, and his truth. There was a quiet gasp from the gallery. The judge looked at her with a mix of surprise and respect. And in that moment, everything shifted. I wasn't the mistress anymore. I wasn't the thief. I was someone who had been hurt just like her. The judge dismissed the case. No new evidence, no grounds to proceed. It was over just like that. But what lingered was Linda's voice, the way she had spoken on my behalf, without hesitation, without bitterness. Outside the courthouse, reporters swarmed. I stayed silent. But Linda turned to the cameras and said, "I am not the only one he lied to. She deserves peace as much as anyone." That was the first time anyone had said those words out loud, and the first time I believed I might actually deserve them. Later in the car, I cried for the first time in weeks. Not from pain, but from the strange warmth of being seen. Not as the woman who won the inheritance, but as the one who had survived it. And not alone. I packed in silence. Not out of sadness, but because there were no words left to say to a house that had held so many illusions. Every drawer I opened was filled with ghosts, and I didn't want to carry any of them with me. I sold the place quickly, not looking back when I handed over the keys. I chose a small cottage 2 towns over, the kind of house with a white fence and a creaky porch that didn't hold any memories. It was quiet in a way that didn't feel hollow, just peaceful. The first night there, I slept straight through until morning. No nightmares, no noise, just the sound of wind through trees and my own steady breathing. I made tea, sat on the porch, and watched the world go by without demanding anything from me. I adopted a dog from the local shelter, a golden mutt with one floppy ear and a calm heart. I named him August for the month I finally exhaled. He followed me everywhere, slept beside me, and looked at me like he didn't care where I'd come from. I started volunteering at the town library twice a week. The director, Ruth, handed me a stack of children's books without asking a single question. "Can you shelve these?" That was all she said, and that was all I needed. No judgment, no curiosity, just trust in the present. I helped in the reading room on Saturdays. The laughter of children, the rustling of pages, the smell of old books, it felt like balm, like proof that the world still had gentle corners untouched by betrayal. I planted herbs in the backyard, lavender, thyme, and mint. I cooked simple meals, went on long walks with August, and wrote letters I never sent. Some to Paul, some to myself. All part of learning how to speak again after months of silence. My phone rang less. I answered even less than that. I didn't miss the noise. I liked the quiet. I liked that no one here called me anything but Miss Jenna or the nice lady with the dog. It wasn't about erasing the past. It was about building something steady in its place, a life with soft mornings and peaceful nights, a routine that didn't come from fear, but from choice. And little by little, I started to feel like I belonged again, not to someone else, but to myself. The invitation came in a simple envelope tucked into my mailbox just days before Christmas. Linda's handwriting was careful, a little shaky, but unmistakably hers. It said dinner, Christmas Eve. No pressure, but we'd love to have you. I stared at it for a long time, unsure whether to cry or smile. A year ago, I was the woman no one would speak to. Now I was being invited to share a table with the family that once saw me as a threat. I took a breath and said yes. The drive was quiet. Snow lined the roads like soft lace, and August sat beside me, tail thumping gently with every turn. When I pulled into the driveway, Linda was already at the door, wearing a red sweater and an expression that made my chest tighten. She hugged me, not out of duty. It was real warm, and it reached a place in me I hadn't felt in years. The house was filled with pine scent and soft music. The grandchildren were running in circles, laughing in bursts. Linda's daughter gave me a small nod from across the room. Not quite a smile, but no longer a glare. It was enough. Dinner was simple. Turkey potatoes, green beans, and 2 kinds of pie. We passed plates and shared small talk. I kept waiting for the air to grow heavy, but it never did. It stayed light, like something had finally shifted. Halfway through the meal, the youngest grandchild tugged at my sleeve. He looked up with big eyes and asked if I was really Tia Jenna from the library. I said I was. He nodded, then whispered that I read the best stories. Across the table, his mother looked at me and smiled. This time it reached her eyes. Later, while the kids built towers near the tree, Linda sat beside me with a glass of wine. She said she never thought she could sit in the same room with me and feel peace. But she did. She said grace wasn't easy, but maybe it was the only thing that could make sense of any of this. When I left, her granddaughter handed me a drawing. Stick figures. One had grey hair. The other had a dog. It said, "Merry Christmas, Tia Jenna." I held it all the way home. That night, the world outside was quiet. My cottage glowed with soft light. August curled up by the fire. And for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel like I was surviving something. I felt like I was part of something. Something fragile, yes, but real. A new kind of family. A new kind of love. And maybe finally a place to belong.